Minister Pando indicated, this is a temporary abode whilst we are working towards establishing a permanent facility for the bank, and we have an acting head whilst the bank is in the process of recruiting. It's quite important that we recruit somebody who understands quite well the South African environment and the African environment broadly, who will understand the needs of the African continent for physical infrastructure, who will have the necessary character and standing and stature on the continent to have that broad and dynamic understanding of the challenges and the various role players on the continent. The third milestone is obviously the finalization of the project pipeline from South Africa. We are hoping that we should, by the time we go to the summit, have developed a semblance of the project pipeline that we will finalize and start accepting funding loans from the bank to implement it. The $1.5 billion, more or less, that has been promised by the bank, as the president of the NDP was saying, will go a long way towards assisting us to reinforce, to strengthen the balance sheets of state-owned companies in order to be able to implement critical infrastructure in the areas that we would agree to. At the present moment, we are working with the PICC to draw up that project pipeline. We are working continuously and very closely with the bank in terms of ensuring that it is credible. These are bankable projects. These are critical projects in terms of our priorities. Because in so doing, we would also assist the South African economy, because at the present moment, in an environment of slow growth, of high unemployment, we do need infrastructure investments in order to reignite growth in the economy, to get employment, especially to get young people employed. And we will work with the bank in regard to all of those programs to ensure that some of our objectives, including localization and others, are met, including the empowerment objectives, are met in the implementation of the projects as we are discussing. And so this is quite an important milestone. We look forward not only to completing these three milestones to which I've just referred, but we look forward towards agreeing at the Board of Governors and at the heads of state level on accepting new membership and ensuring that there are more African countries that come on board as members that can also receive funding, because the infrastructure gap in Africa is quite significant, and in actual fact robs the continent of about 2% of GDP growth we would be receiving had that infrastructure been available. And so it's quite an important and urgent matter for us to go in this direction, and the bank will provide a counterweight in terms of the international development banks. It will provide a counterweight in regard to that environment to provide more favorable funding towards developing countries with lesser stringent conditionalities that will ensure that we don't only look towards the West for the funding of our infrastructure and other needs, but we can now look at a credible institution among developing countries that will support the development objectives that we have in a manner that's going to encourage the fulfillment of our objectives, because for quite a long time developing countries have been crying out for the lack of such an institution, and now that we are building it, we will continue to work very fastidiously to ensure that it becomes credible and joins the ranks of the multilateral development banks and ensure that it can play the role that we want it to play in assisting with the development of developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Vice Presidents. Thank you for introductory remarks. Now we are ready to open floor for questions. Let me please briefly explain some basic rules for that. Please name yourself and the name of the media you are representing, and we kindly request you to address your questions to the matters related to today's event. Thank you. Please. Yeah, please.
My name is Justin Brown. I'm a journalist with City Press. Just wanted to find out who is the acting head of the ARC. And then there's also been mention of new members. Has the bank engaged with any countries regarding membership? And have you had any approaches from countries seeking membership? I just want to clarify a question regarding Eskom.
Oh, excuse me. You should also give opportunity to other colleagues. Let us please have these two. Thank you.
Did we take a few questions or just one at a time?
Yeah, no, the first was a question about the ARC acting head. Am I correct?
Where is Dumi?
He's outside, Minister.
Yeah, bring him here. Let him come and introduce himself.
Yeah.
We have meanwhile taken an official from the National Treasury who is part of the GTEC Treasury with vast experience to be the acting head. Come in, Chief, and introduce yourself so that you can be known and have your pictures taken.
This is the acting head.
So my name is Dumi Muleke. I am the acting head or the acting director general of the ARC.
Thank you. And the second question of yours was about the membership. The second question is about membership, about any applications received.
Maybe I'll kick off in the answer there. I think the first point to make is that the New Development Bank Articles of Agreement, the founding documents of the bank, makes provision that the bank will be open to new members. And in fact, the Articles of Agreement states the bank will be open to all members of the United Nations. So it was always part of the vision of the founding fathers that the bank will grow over time beyond the 5 BRICS countries. Right? The key question has always just been the pace thereof, the modalities, the sequencing, etc. At the moment, the Articles makes a provision that the new membership of the bank will be comprised of 3 categories. Firstly, the BRICS countries will dilute their shareholding to a minimum of 55%. At some point in the future, the 5 BRICS countries will have 11% each, 55%. A further 25% will be set aside for developing countries. So in that way, 80% of the bank will always, in the future, be controlled by the emerging markets and developing world. And that underscores the narrative stated by the President, both of President Zuma as well as President Kamath, that this bank is really the voice of emerging markets within the multilateral space. The final 20% will be set aside for advanced industrialized countries, as it's called, non-borrowing members. And this structure of borrowing members and non-borrowing members is part of the DNA of all the multilateral banks. The World Bank has such a structure, Africa Development Bank, Asia Development Bank, and so on. The bank has just completed the process of defining the terms and conditions, and Minister Gigaba serves as one of the governors of the bank. We've been given direction by the Board of Governors to proceed with the process. So the process has just really begun. We are not yet able to admit members now. There's no application process where a member can apply tomorrow to join. The detailed process is still being defined, and we will receive further political guidance from the Board of Governors with regards to the timing thereof. But as I said, the essential key point is that it will be dominated by emerging markets. African countries, countries from Latin America, countries from Asia will all be open to join.
Mr. Mazdov, thank you for your remarks. Please.
Yes, my name is Alexander, I'm chairman of the Russian Customs Agency, and I have 2 questions to Mr. Gigaba. The first one, provided the downgrades of the recession in South Africa, do you view the opening of the RC as a helping hand from another side? And as far as I understand, it was done very quickly, as you said yourself. So just to show that there are other sources of investment in South Africa rather than the West, as you said. And the second question is that Mr. Mlalane refused the offer to chair the bank, the Africa Regional Center.
Thank you for your questions. So,
Yes. Thank you very much. Let me start with Mr. Nene. I wouldn't know. I didn't appoint him. So I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. I was not involved in that process. So I think you can ask someone else. With regard to the Africa Regional Center, you know, you cannot evade a ratings grade by establishing an alternative. So the importance of the existence of the Africa Regional Center is to assist us to implement our infrastructure objectives and meet our other funding needs. To the extent that that may also assist in the environment of a ratings downgrade, we would appreciate it, but we're not looking at the Africa Regional Center as a way of evading the ratings downgrade. We did not rush this process. It's been many years in the making. What we have done now is to expedite the process since April this year, so that we are on par with other member states, with other founding members of BRICS. The delay in the launch of the Africa Regional Center had caused a delay in the launch of other regional centers in the other regions. And so this is going to assist in opening up that space and taking that work forward. But we will quite appreciate the commitment by the bank to also issue rand-denominated loans, because it's going to assist us a great deal in terms of the structure and quality of our debt and our ability to meet our debt requirements. Because when you are downgraded, especially in your dollar-denominated currency, you then remain with that latitude. Most of the South African debt, and what has been a great benefit to us, is that the rand-denominated, most of our debt is owned by South Africans and it's rand-denominated. Even that portion which is owned by foreigners. And that has provided us a bit of a cushion. But for us to deal with that environment, we don't need to hop from one multilateral development bank to another. We need to sort out our economy, to address the structural weaknesses in the economy, to ensure that the economy grows, because our own behavior, particularly as a founding member, will have a positive or negative effect on the value of the debt that the NDP is able to issue. And so we must not aim to compromise it by acting recklessly in the hope that we will seek solace and comfort and cover from the NDP, but we must strengthen the NDP by doing what we need to do in terms of our own economy.
thank you. Maybe you?
Devin Murugan, SABC Economics News. I just wanted to find out the government's understanding of why the new development bank's loan to Eskom, $180 million, has been put on ice at the moment. Mr. Kama, project in the newspapers is saying that. Now, what's government's understanding of where we are with that loan to Eskom?
There is ongoing discussion between the government, Eskom, and the NDP with regard to the loan that had been provided to Eskom. It was earmarked for green energy, and that earmarked funding can and could not be used for anything other than that. And so there's nothing out of the ordinary. It's just the fact that this was earmarked for green energy. Now, you will remember that when we announced the 14 confidence boosting measures on the 13th of June this year, we indicated that there had been challenges raised by Eskom with regard to, one, because the economy had slowed down, the demand for electricity had itself dropped. Particularly your big consumers like the mining companies, their demand had dropped. And that meant that, and Eskom at the same time, over the last few years, had succeeded to put more power stations into maintenance, to strengthen its generation capacity, and therefore was not only able to meet our electricity demands, but also had surplus electricity, which is estimated at about 5,700 megawatts. It's bigger than the generation capacity of any single one of our power stations, including Medupi or Kusile. And that meant that its IPP commitments became difficult to meet because it came with a number of other challenges. It came with government guarantees, it came with Eskom purchasing renewable energy which it wasn't going to use, and now they needed to build transmission lines for them to be able to export, to sell to our neighboring countries some of the excess electricity that they had generated. So this loan could be called in the future and used again for green energy when the economy picks up, the demand for electricity picks up, because quite clearly in terms of the IRP 2010, we do need to invest more on renewable energy in order to reduce our carbon emissions. So it's not something that's malicious or that has other insinuations. It really is because the funding was earmarked for green energy. We will continue to seek funding from the NDP for other projects. And that's why the project pipeline is so important. And it becomes difficult when the funding agreement is that we will fund rail infrastructure, and then Transnet comes back and says, oh well, because the demand on the iron ore line or the coal line has dropped, can you give us the money so that we use it to buy locomotives? Doesn't work that way. Must remain as we had agreed.
Your Excellency, thank you for your remarks. I would like to remind you that we are approaching half an hour mark, and probably we will have two more questions. Please, brief ones. Yes, please.
Roxanne from BRICS Journal. The 2016 BRICS Trade Fair allowed for amazing opportunities for entrepreneurs, for trade opportunities for entrepreneurs. Based on the 7-point action plan that's been initiated, will the 2017 BRICS Fair allow for the same, or is it going to be cancelled?
I don't know any of what you just said.
The 7-point plan.
Yes, sir. So, well, I mean, the big focus on manufacturing, and
Yes.
industrial revolution. So, my question basically is, will we see the same scale of entrepreneurship and trade opportunities as we did last year at the trade fair?
Well, I'm sure that the vice presidents who were there, since I wasn't there myself, may give a better light. But it's quite evident that what we're trying to achieve at BRICS is a number of things. On the one hand, it's to strengthen our political hand in the structures and institutions of international governance, both political and economic. And within your G20, within your IMF, World Bank, and at the United Nations, BRICS is a significant voice. But on the other hand, we're trying to strengthen our hand in terms of our voice in the economic structures of global governance, and within that, we are increasing our economic and trade relations. So the various ministers of finance, of trade and commerce and others are increasing their focus on the programs that we need to implement to improve industrialization, infrastructure rollout, financing of infrastructure, and just block relations in terms of trade fair and programs of that nature, you are going to see an increase in trade relations, an increase in industrialization, manufacturing, and trade among one another in terms of the manufactured goods. The global recession in 2008 provided us an opportunity to develop new trading partners, new markets for our products, to begin to diversify from your traditional markets and establish new markets. All of us have a responsibility to assist one another to open more markets in our respective regions. That's why the Africa Regional Center is so important, and that's why the new membership will assist the bank to access the African continent. And you will also see our state-owned companies in respective countries increasing their collaboration to provide infrastructure, to provide components for infrastructure, such as fleet locomotives, wagons, and rail, and other things that will assist all of us to access different markets and do business in those regional markets.
Thank you for your answer. So we are doing the last question, please.
I'm Louise from 24. I just need clarity. It mentioned that the international rating of the bank is to be finalized, and I just wanted to know, does that mean the bank is currently unrated?
Sure. So multilateral banks, one of the key aspects of a multilateral bank that makes them unique is that they are very highly rated, right? So there are very few institutions in the world that have a AAA rating. The institutions that do have those ratings are the IFC, International Finance Corporation, the World Bank, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the European Investment Bank, and so on. Probably less than 25 or so institutions in the world in that kind of category. The New Development Bank has a AAA rating in the domestic Chinese capital markets. So in 2016, less than a year after we've opened our offices, the bank obtained a rating from two of the largest rating agencies in China, China Chengchen and China Lianhe Rating Agency. So that allowed us to issue a bond which was AAA rated in the Chinese local markets. The bank is now in the process to obtain an international rating. That is an ongoing process. We've already started our engagements, and as Mr. Kamath indicated in his address, in the next number of months, that process will reach the stage where we're likely to get an outcome. Why a rating is important, as I mentioned right at the beginning, is that it allows the bank to raise funding in the debt markets at a cheaper rate, which allows us then to on-lend at competitive rates when we structure these large loans. So in a nutshell, the bank is rated right now, but only in China, and we're in the process of obtaining an international credit rating.
Which is why the earlier answer about our rating is so important, because South Africa has a responsibility towards the bank. It's not only the bank that has a responsibility towards us. We have a responsibility towards the bank to enable it to take loans that are competitive and on lend at a competitive rate. If we are only AAA rated in China, but in other countries such as South Africa we are downgraded, we need to ensure, as the South African government, that we improve our financial performance, we improve our ratings grade, and then we are able, even with regard to the rand-denominated loan that the bank would consider providing us, to ensure a good interest.
Thank you. So thank you, dear dignitaries. Thank you, colleagues. This concludes our press conference. In case of any questions, please approach us, or in case of any fact-checking needs. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much, Minister.
Thanks, Minister.
Thanks, Chief. Cool.
That's a live media briefing from the newly launched New Development Bank out in Sandton. The executives, of course, outlining some of the bank's functions in detail. Malusi Kikaba, they're saying that this is a milestone for the African continent as a whole, in that it will seek to reignite growth and deal with, among others, issues of rampant youth unemployment, and also that we will no longer need to rely solely on the Western powers for funding for critical infrastructure, as we will have a credible institution that will support the mandate for development programs. He said at this stage the bank has just an acting head, as they are currently working on recruiting staff and putting someone in charge, and this would have to be someone that has sound knowledge and understanding of the African economy as well as sphere as a whole, so as to ensure that the bank is able to implement these critical goals. These were just some of the highlights from that briefing.